One of the fellows you're about to meet wrote the first article of impeachment against President Clinton. Bruce Fein did so because perjury is a legal crime, and Fein believed no one is above the law. A constitutional scholar, Bruce Fein served in the Justice Department during the Reagan administration and as general counsel of the Federal Communications Commission. He's joined by John Nichols, the Washington correspondent for The Nation and an associate editor at the Capital Times. Among his many books is this most recent one, The Genius of Impeachment, The Founder's Cure for Royalism. Do you think Cheney should be subject to impeachment hearings?
Without a doubt. Cheney is, for all practical purposes, the foreign policy president of the United States. There are many domestic policies in which George Bush really is the dominant player. But on foreign policy, Dick Cheney has been calling the shots for 6 years.
But we're talking about assertions of power that affect the individual liberties of every American citizen. Opening your mail, your emails, your phone calls, breaking and entering your home, creating a pall of fear and intimidation. If you say anything against the president, you may find retaliation very quickly. We're claiming he's setting precedents that will lie around like loaded weapons anytime there's another 9/11. Right now, the victims are people whose names most Americans can't pronounce, and that's why they're not so concerned. They will start being Browns and Jones and Smiths, and that precedent is being set right now. And one of the dangers that I see is this: not just President Bush, but the presidential candidates for 2008 aren't standing up and saying, if I'm president, I won't imitate George Bush. That shows that this is a far deeper problem than Mr. Bush and Cheney.
This administration will hand off a toolbox with more powers than any president has ever had. More powers than the founders could have imagined. And that box may be handed to Hillary Clinton, or it may be handed to Mitt Romney or Barack Obama or someone else. But whoever gets it, one of the things we know about power is that people don't give away the tools. They don't give them up. The only way we take tools out of that box is if we sanction George Bush and Dick Cheney now and say the next president cannot govern as these.
Well, that's accurate, but also we do find this peculiarity that Congress is giving up powers voluntarily. Because there's nothing right now, Bill, that would prevent Congress from immediately shutting down all of George Bush's and Dick Cheney's illegal programs, simply saying there's no money to collect foreign intelligence, the power of the purse. That is an absolute power, and yet Congress shies from it. The Founding Fathers expected an executive would try to overreach and expected the executive would be hampered and curtailed by the legislative branch. And you're right, they have basically renounced, walked away from their responsibility to overreach. It's not an option. They do not have convictions about the importance of the Constitution. It's what in politics you would call the scientific method of discovering political truth and of preventing excesses, because you require, through the processes of review and vetting, one individual's perception to be checked and counterbalanced by another's. And when you abandon that process, you abandon the ship of state, basically, and it's going to capsize.
Let me mention the unspoken branch of government, which is the fourth estate, the media. The fact of the matter is the founders anticipated that presidents would overreach. And they anticipated that at times politics would cause Congress to be a weaker player or a dysfunctional player. But they always assumed that the press would alert the people, that the press would tell the people. And the fact of the matter is, I think that our media in the last few years has done an absolutely miserable job of highlighting the constitutional issues that are in play. You know, you can't have torture and extraordinary rendition. You cannot have spying. You cannot have a lying to Congress. You cannot have what happened to Joe Wilson and Valerie Plame,
Where she was outed and they tried to punish Wilson.
Plotted out of the vice president's office without question. Notations of the vice president on news articles saying, let's go get this guy, right? You know, you can't have that and not have a media going and saying to the president at press conferences, you know, isn't what you're doing in violation of the Constitution? Now, just imagine if the members of the White House press corps on a regular basis were saying to Tony Snow, but hasn't what the president's done here violated the Constitution? The whole national dialogue would shift, and Congress itself would suddenly become a better player. So I'm not absolving Congress. I'm certainly not absolving Bush and Cheney, but I am saying that we have a media problem here as well.
Let me underscore one of the things, and you'll remember, Bill, because I was there at the time of Watergate, and this relates to one political official in the White House, Sarah Taylor's testimony, and claiming that George Bush could tell her to be silent.
There was a great moment when Sarah Taylor said, I took an oath to uphold the president, Did you see that?
Yes, and that's like the military in Germany saying, my oath is to the Fuhrer, not to the country. She took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. I did too when I was in the government. There's no oath that says I'm loyal to a president even if he defiles the Constitution. Ever. One example of the abuse of presidential authority, seeking to obstruct a legitimate congressional investigation by a preposterous assertion of executive privilege. Remember, in a democracy and under the Constitution, transparency and sunshine is the rule. The exception is only for matters of grave national security secrets. That certainly doesn't apply here.
How does the Scooter Libby affair play into this? People seem really angry about this.
The heart of what I think an awful lot of Americans are concerned about with this administration and with the executive branch in general, that it is lawless, that it can rewrite the rules for itself, that it can protect itself. And you know, the founders anticipated just such a moment. If you look at the discussions in the Federalist Papers, but also at the Constitutional Convention, when they spoke about impeachment, one of the things that Madison and George Mason spoke about was the notion that you needed the power to impeach, particularly as regards pardons and commutations, because a president might try to take the burden of the law off members of his administration to prevent them from cooperating with Congress in order to expose wrongdoing by the president himself. And so Madison said that is why we must have the power to impeach, because otherwise a president might be able to use his authority and pardons and such to prevent an investigation from getting to him.
Are you suggesting that Libby had the goods on Cheney and Bush?
I think the bottom line is Scooter Libby was involved in conversations that, frankly, if those conversations were brought out to the American people, would be very helpful to our discourse about whether we entered this war illegally and whether we've continued this war in ways which we never should have.
I think the spark against the Libby commutation is a little bit different focused. I think it's less on the ideas covering up for Cheney or Bush than the indication that Bush is totally heedless of any honor for law and accountability, that he has special rules for him and his cabinet. You may recall at the outset of the investigation, he said, anybody in my office who is responsible for this leak will not work for me. Karl Rove was shown to have leaked, and Karl Rove is still sitting in the White House. And he says, well, he will issue a commutation here, but he's not issued commutations in similar circumstances to anybody else. Moreover, the obstruction of justice of Libby is a carbon copy of Clinton, which Republicans, including me, supported. That's why I said you got to give a stiff sentence here. How can you say that Clinton deserves impeachment and here you're commuting someone who did the same thing? And it's that sort of outrage that this is now a sneering attitude towards everybody else. This is combined with all the other things he's done outside the law, the intelligence gathering, the enemy combatant status, the kidnappings in dungeons abroad, all secret and never disclosing anything to Congress or the American people. Indeed, we couldn't even be discussing some of these issues here, like the Foreign Intelligence Collection Program, if it weren't a leak to the New York Times. If he had his way, this would be secret forever.
Sneering is not an impeachable offense. But the founders who had recently fought a revolution against a king named George would tell you that monarchical behavior, the behavior of acting like a king, is an impeachable offense. You need not look for specific laws or statutes. What you need to look for is a pattern of behavior that says that the presidency is superior not merely to Congress, but to the laws of the land, to the rule of law.
I think what ought to happen, there needs to be the hearings in the Judiciary Committee that need first to provide an educational session. This is why we care. Impeachment hearings. This is why these are political.
You are saying you want the Judiciary Committee to call formal hearings on the impeachment of George Bush and Dick Cheney?
Yes, because there are political crimes that have been perpetrated in combination.
We need some accountability.
But Nancy Pelosi doesn't agree.
Nancy Pelosi is wrong. Nancy Pelosi is disregarding her oath of office. She should change course now. And more importantly, members of her caucus and responsible Republicans should step up.
The great genius of the Founding Fathers, their revolutionary idea was the chief mission of the state is to make you and them free, to pursue their ambitions and faculties, not to build empires, not to aggrandize government. That's the mission of the state, to make them free, to think, to chart their own destiny. And the burden is on the government to give really good explanations as to why they're taking these extraordinary measures. And on that score, Bush has flunked on every single occasion. And we need to get the American people to think. Every time that there's an incursion on freedom, they have to demand why. What is the explanation? Give me a good reason before I give up my freedom.